is retrieval practice? Retrieval practice, according to cultofpedagogy.com, is the act of trying to recall information without having it in front of you. Suppose you're trying to study the systems of the human body, the skeletal, muscular, circulatory, and so on. You could do a retrieval practice by attempting to name those systems without looking at the list. Once you've listed all you can remember, you'd open up your book or notes and check it to see if you got them right. Teachers use this all the time in the classroom. And on today's podcast, I'll be speaking with Kate Jones. Kate is a teacher, an author, and a blogger, and she has written several books on retrieval practice. In this episode, we will be talking about retrieval practice. We'll also touch on EduTwitter and so much more. Let's dive in.
You are listening to the Teach Middle East podcast, connecting, developing, and empowering educators.
Well, hi everyone, and welcome back to the Teach Middle East podcast. Today, my special guest is Kate Jones, and we'll be chatting retrieval practice, EduTwitter, teaching and learning, moving back to the UK, life in the Middle East, and whatever else comes up. Hi, Kate. Welcome.
Hello. Thanks for having me on your podcast.
It's our pleasure. So to kick off, just give us a brief intro for those who are under a rock and don't know you.
Well, I teach here in Abu Dhabi. I'm currently head of history at the British school Al Kabaira, known as BSAC. Before that, I was a teacher at Brighton College in Al Ain. So I lived in Al Ain for 3 years, very different experience. But at the end of the year, the academic year, I am returning to Wales, back in the UK. And in addition to my teaching role, I am a writer. I've written for Teach Middle East magazine, and I've got my own website, lovetoteach87.com. I'm a blogger, and I'm an author of 4 books. Obviously, we'll talk about retrieval practice today, and 3 of those books have been about retrieval practice. And then the other book was my debut book, was Love to Teach. And I do lots of events, speaking and working with teachers. So I'm very busy, so busy.
Yeah, we know. Thank you. Thank you for making time for us today, because obviously it can get quite full on when you have that many things that you're doing. I want to take it back, because when we talk to teachers, we kind of like to get into what teachers, where they're coming from, you know, what their background is. And what was your fondest memory of your school days? So let's go way back to when you were in school. What was your fondest memory of your school days?
Actually, initially, my memory goes back to my history teacher. He was incredibly kind, so intelligent. The inspiration for me studying history at GCSE, A-level, university. I'm still in touch with him now, Mr. Healy, David Healy. We're going to have a coffee when I go back to the UK. It's really interesting that I taught in the UK for 6 years, and lots of former students have reached out to me in the same way I've reached out to my old history teacher. So it just comes back to about that impact that we do have as teachers on people. And I think I sometimes forget that as a teacher. But then when I think back to my teachers and the kindness they showed, because actually Mr. Healy, not only for the history side element of it, but someone who I really cared about died when I was studying for my A-levels. And I was really, really upset and devastated. I thought it would have a really negative impact on my A-levels, which luckily it didn't. And I think it's because the staff were so kind and understanding. And instead of saying, okay, I know this is tough, but we've got exams, they just put my pastoral care ahead of academic success. And then because of that, I did have academic success as well. So yeah, Mr. Healy, my old history teacher.
That was a lovely story. I think we sometimes forget as teachers the impact we have on students. It's funny because I was in Yas Mall, maybe I want to say a couple of weeks ago. So I won't give away the teacher's name because that's one of your colleagues at BSAC.
Oh,
She came up to me and she was like, hello, miss. And I'm like, why is somebody calling me miss? Because that makes me feel rather old. And this is the UAE. I'm trying to live my best young life out here. And the person was like, you were my grade 8 teacher. You were my form tutor in London. And I was like, oh my God. And I looked at her and yes, I could literally see her as a child. And she was like, I just wanted to say thank you and that I'm sorry if I gave you any trouble. and that now I'm a teacher at BSAC. And I was like, wow, I'm super proud and super old all at the same time. I couldn't believe it. But it's amazing when you get the feedback. So if Mr. Healy ever listens to this, well done, sir. You produced a fantastic history teacher in Kate. So let's go back to your teaching. Which grades do you like to teach most?
Oh, that is so tough because it's a great question though, because they're so different. I love teaching year 7, the enthusiasm and wide eyes and they're amazing. And sometimes when I'm teaching year 7, I wish I was a primary school teacher. But then I do have my A-level classes where I'm going into lots of detail and there's lots of discussion and they're obviously young adults and you just go into so much more depth. But actually, if I had to answer, I hope none of my students get offended by this, but it is the little ones. It's the year 7s. I have a particular year 7 class right now I only have one year 7 class. I usually teach more than one. But this year 7 class, I just look at my timetable, see I've got them, and I'm like, yes, I look forward to it. They are just the sweetest and so kind, and it's just great. Yay. So the little ones.
Wow. Such a contrast because when I taught, I preferred the older ones. I loved the banter. I mean, I taught in a city, London, and the kids there are like, they're so vivacious and they just give you all that chat. And I like it. It's weird, but I like it. I like when they mouth off and then you have an argument with them and then you can bring them over to your side because you can reason with them and they're older. But I can understand loving the grade 7s as well. I just prefer when they're like grade 9, 10, 11, and we can go at it, toe to toe with each other. It's kind of fun. What is your go-to starter activity? Let's say you didn't plan and you had to go in, and I know you plan everything, but just one day you didn't plan so much, but you had to go in and do a starter activity. What would your go-to starter activity be?
Oh, well, this is a great question for me because it'd be retrieval practice, a brain dump, which is low effort for the teachers, but has a high impact on learning. It's write down everything you can remember about the contenders of the throne in 1066. Write down everything you can remember about the conditions in the World War I trench. So there we go. Really simple, straightforward, but then they can have an opportunity to retrieve information. You can share the answers. Brilliant.
Brilliant. Because that's leading me nicely into your books. Along with everything else that you do, you've managed to write 4 books. I don't know how you did it. I'm still in awe. But I want to talk about your books on retrieval practice. And if people aren't aware of what retrieval practice is, can you define it for me so that we can get everybody at the same level?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think there are teachers who aren't familiar with the term, but they'll be familiar with the concept of it. So retrieval practice, the key thing to remember is that it's a teaching and learning strategy, not an assessment strategy, in the sense of students have to recall information from their memory. And every time they do that, it changes the memory to hopefully improve and enhance it for the next time that they have to recall that information. And then the reason I said it's teaching and learning, not assessment, is because if we were to say every lesson, right, sit down everyone, you've got a test, and then it's quite high stakes, it's quite stressful, whereas retrieval practice is the opposite. It's low stakes, it can be enjoyable, engaging, it can be a multiple choice quiz, it can be the brain dump that I just spoke about. So basically, anytime you have to recall information from memory, either verbally or through writing, then you are retrieving that information. But we can't just do it once. It has to be regular, every lesson, very consistent, hence the term retrieval practice. So it's about improving our long-term memory.
So you're now on book number 4. Tell us about book number 4. What is it about?
So book number 4 is just about to be published. And this came from lots of teachers, feedback from teachers really, who liked my previous books. And there's been a theme with all the previous books that it contains academic research and exploration. What does the research tell us? And then resources and ideas. But this book, the resource guide, is just ideas and activities. And there's over 50 different retrieval practice tasks. And it's the same format for each of those. How it works, a visual example, so you can see the diagram or the worksheet, and then my top tips. And they are activities that can be adapted for primary or secondary or elementary or older students or different subjects. Because lots of teachers had said to me, I really liked your books and I found the research really interesting and now I'm using the ideas. It'd be great to have all of those ideas in one place. So that's what I've done. I've taken the ideas from my previous 3 books and then new ideas and put them all into this resource guide. So it's very, very practical for teachers. It's something that I think would be quite useful to have in your desk, in your classroom. And when you're looking for an idea or inspiration or to do retrieval practice in a different way, flick through that. And then there might be something that you can use. Well, there should be, hopefully.
Yeah. And it's a build-up, you said, of your other 3 books. I wonder why teachers should be taking retrieval practice so serious, especially at this time with the pandemic and everything.
We really should embrace this strategy. I first started learning about retrieval practice actually when I was at Brighton College, Lane, and it wasn't as well known. So I think we're looking at like 2016. And I started reading lots of research, stuff I'd found on Twitter. And I remember I had year 10, the whole cohort I was teaching myself. And I introduced retrieval practice every lesson and effective strategies. I was coaching them how to study and how to revise. And I remember at the end of those 2 years how confident I felt about the class that were about to sit the exam. And they felt incredibly confident as well. They just were like, Miss, we're okay about this exam, whatever comes up. And it's because we'd had 2 years of retrieval practice. And then the results were amazing. It was 100% A star to A. And there was somebody predicted in that class, had a Cat 4 predictor of a D. And he got 50 out of 50 on a paper. Now, I've always said that was a combination of retrieval practice, their work ethic, their attitude, lots and lots of things. But then all of a sudden, I was a golden girl. All the eyes were on me. Kate, these results are incredible. What's your secret? And I started then presenting to staff saying, it's not a secret. It's this strategy known as retrieval practice. You're probably already doing it in your lessons with quizzes, but are you doing it every lesson? Are you spacing it out? Are you not just asking what we did last lesson, but are you asking what we did last week and the week before? The only thing that was a shame about those students is that the strategies that I was teaching them, they weren't applying them in all of their subjects. So they thought they were history techniques and it was just sort of, that was my thing. No, absolutely not. It works across the board. So then those results then gave me a platform within my own school to talk about retrieval practice. And my best friend in the school, Louise Rycroft, she was head of psychology. So I was always asking her questions about memory. And we presented together for staff at Brighton. So Louise covered the psychology elements about how memory works. And then I said, here's lots of classroom ideas. Then I started sharing the ideas on Twitter. And I started writing about it, getting a lot of interest. And then that's what ultimately led to me writing this book. So going back to your question about why should teachers use retrieval practice? Well, there's 2 reasons for me. The evidence is overwhelming. The research has been replicated, and it's said many, many times that this is an effective teaching and learning strategy. But then you've got me and my experience and lots of other teachers who share that experience. It's not just the research, but my experience matches the evidence and the benefits. The benefits are not just the results. It was the confidence, the reduction in anxiety, how we felt ready, how we felt prepared. So ever since then, I've been a complete convert. And even if someone pushed a research paper in front of me and said, oh, this research paper says retrieval practice isn't as effective. Well, first of all, okay, that's a research paper. I would still read it. So I'm not got my confirmation biased, just looking for evidence to say it works. But having said that, even if there was a piece of research that said it wasn't, what about all the other research that says it is effective? And then again, my experience, but it has been working in my classrooms. I've seen the impact. I've seen the improvement on outcomes. I've seen the boost with confidence and well-being for myself as a teacher and with students. And what retrieval practice does, which highlighting, rereading and underlining doesn't do, is retrieval practice shows students what they can recall, what they remember, and what they can't. So it identifies gaps in knowledge. It's there black and white. Tick or cross. Yes, you got that correct. That was incorrect. Whereas when students are just constantly rereading, highlighting their notes, it doesn't tell them if they can recall that information. They feel confident. They feel familiar with the material because they've reread it. Then they get into an exam situation and they struggle to remember it. Whereas retrieval practice will show them, okay, I couldn't remember this. So that's the gap in my knowledge. I will close that knowledge gap. So with online learning, where we've had lessons, maybe at times where you've set work on the Google Classroom and you haven't actually taught lessons, and we had to do that at BSAC at one point because there was lots of students who'd left because we had the early spring break. So we had students on different time zones. So we were setting work and they weren't having live lessons. So it's really important to then do a retrieval quiz, not to be high stakes, saying, what did you miss because of COVID and let's catch up? Not at all. But instead to be low stakes and think, where are the gaps in the knowledge? And then that can inform my planning because then I can close those gaps.
That sounds like it would be very, very useful, especially now people are talking so much about the learning loss, which, I have strong opinions about, which I won't use on this podcast. But I know there had to be some level of learning loss over the period that we're still enduring. But what's the feedback been like for teachers using retrieval practice, especially as schools have resumed?
The feedback from schools I've worked with and my colleagues is always really positive. So I have had some negative feedback in terms of retrieval practice, which tends to be, I don't have time for it. It takes up my time. I've got a lot of content to teach. And I understand that as a teacher. But then my counter argument is, this is one of the most effective teaching and learning strategies. We have to find time for it. Review our lessons, adapt. It doesn't have to, be the whole lesson. It can be. And I think it's about striking the balance with retrieval practice, that you don't rush it, that you do give enough time for meaningful feedback and reflection, but then you don't let retrieval practice hijack your lesson. So then you do fall behind with content. So it's a process of implementing it, embedding on it and reflecting on it. And that's why I wrote my second book about it, which was those strategies. Now you understand what retrieval practice is. This is what the research said. Here's some examples. Now actually, this is what I've learned along the way. This is what other teachers have said has worked that's helped them, and about that fine tuning it to make it work in our context.
I can't think of the fact that someone would come back with, I don't have time for retrieval practice because of more content. Because if that's the case, you're cramming the content without knowing whether or not the students are retaining it. So there has to be some amount of time. What's a quick strategy they could use? I know the brain dump, we talked about that as a starter, but maybe look at the middle of a lesson. So we're introducing new content. We want to connect the schemas and we want to make sure that the students are able to make that connection effectively. What's a quick strategy for a teacher to just implement in the middle of their classroom to do that?
I think a multiple choice quizzes quiz. So quizzes is my favourite online quizzing tool. There's loads of great online tools. And I'm not an ambassador. I don't have a quizzes badge like all these people. I'm not like that. I know nothing wrong with that, but I just think it compromises a little bit. I genuinely just share it because it's brilliant in my classroom. And the reason I say that is because the teachers who sort of say, I haven't got time, with quizzes, you can look at pre-made quizzes that are already there. So you could type in your topic, whatever that is, into the search bar, and then just teleport questions over. And you can cherry pick them. So you just think, I don't want that question. I'm not going to have that. Oh, I'll take that question. But even when you teleport it to your quiz, you could tweak it slightly. So I've made some quizzes that I've been very happy with, and I've made them in a very short amount of time. And then the other thing about quizzes is that it marks it for you. And it gives the results to the students. You can have an overview. Whereas even though I'm a fan of mini whiteboards, that can be a little bit trickier in terms of you have to look at everyone. It depends on class size. But with a quizzes quiz, the results are there if you wanted to just look back later. If you wanted to see where were the reds, where were the incorrect answers. So I could just be aware of that. Whereas with a whiteboard, that's harder. So a multiple choice quiz, and like you said about that transition, if you can make the links to something else, then it will help that new information when we're trying to encode that, especially when we're building on connections. So there's a bit of a myth that retrieval practice should be at the start of a lesson. Now, I do think it is a great way to start a lesson, but there's no research I've encountered that says it should be at this point, not at this point. It could be at any point. You could have retrieval practice at the end of a lesson, but the only thing you need to be careful is that you're not asking a question about something you've said 5 minutes ago, because it's not then coming from their long-term memory. It's in their short-term memory. So you can ask questions at the end of a lesson to check for understanding, which is really helpful. But if you were to do a retrieval quiz at the end, you would ask questions based on content further back than that lesson. So there's so many. This is the thing I love about retrieval practice as well, and it's my mantra: low effort, high impact. Low effort for the teacher in terms of planning and delivery, but high impact on student learning. So many quick and easy wins that are not gimmicky, and they are effective.
Yeah, I like the idea of having that quiz. I think what would be even better is if that quiz had some old content, like really old content, and then that relates and you could really see whether or not they're making those connections, and you're looking at it quickly. And even for students who are still on distance learning, if you're doing that quick multiple choice quizzes, you can easily just check that, online. I think that's a brilliant, brilliant strategy. 4 books. How do you manage to write 4 books, teach full-time, speak, write articles? How do you do it? What's your secret? Because teachers always talk about, I don't have the time. How do you do it?
I get this question a lot, and sometimes I'm not sure. But what I will say is that I am taking a little bit of time out of the classroom. So I'm not going to teach in September. I'm going to complete a master's, although I need to finish off my application. But anyway, I'm working on doing a master's, and I have another book that I'll be writing, and I'm working with lots of schools. Now, that's not long term, but that's because what I am doing now is quite unsustainable, really. Things have suffered in the sense of my social life, or at times, sleep. These are things that are really important. So I've shown it is possible. And many other teachers have shown that you can write a book and be in the classroom. And then your voice is so authentic. You're writing about what you're doing day in, day out. And I have thoroughly enjoyed that. But I think I've reached the point now where I'm working with so many schools and writing so often that what I don't want, which I've always tried to make sure this never happens, is I've never wanted my teaching to slip or my head of department duties. BSAC has always come first. Books can wait, my students can't, and deadlines have to be met. But having said that, my books have always taken a back seat. So the next book I write, I'm really looking forward to having that time, that it's not sort of rushed in the evenings and completed over weekends. I'm actually taking a whole month out for writing in October. I'm working in schools in September, and then a month of just writing and just really enjoying the writing. So it's definitely possible. And I am very, very motivated. People talk about things on Netflix, and I've never really seen it. And I don't want to be someone, though, who gives the impression to my colleagues that I don't have a life, because I'm a leader. I want to lead by example with work-life balance. So I do have great friends. We do brunches, beach days and things like that. But there's no doubt about it that when you're an author and a full-time teacher, that it can have an impact on balance and things like that. So it's just Luckily, John Catt are very good and don't give me strict deadlines. They are very flexible. And that's why I've been able to do what I have been able to do.
Yeah, I wondered. I wondered. And as a busy person myself, I still wondered how you managed to do all of that. Well, congratulations. I think you've done a fantastic job. I haven't read any of the last, I don't think I've read the last two, but I'll try and get my hands on them and read 3 and 4. But you've really done well with the first 2 that I've read. And which kind of takes me into my next, I guess, category of questions, which is around Twitter, because I think my first encounter with you was on Twitter. I mean, we've met in person several times since then, but Twitter and it's, I guess, how do teachers harness the power of Twitter for their own professional development? How can they do it? You've done it successfully. How can others do it?
Yes, I think there's 2 things I've done with Twitter. I've used Twitter to become a better teacher, to learn, to network, but I've also used it for my career. I wouldn't be an author and speaker without Twitter and the platform and the profile that it's given to me. So I think there's 2 ways of looking at EduTwitter. What do you want from it? Are you looking to do something? Like, I get lots of messages with people saying, I want to speak at events, I want to write books and blogs. And I always say, well, get on Twitter because there's an audience. Yeah, absolutely. And that's it, isn't it? When I came to the UAE, I wanted, if I think back 2016, I remember you being very active on Twitter, but not many people in the UAE community. There was you, there was Steve Bambury, like a handful of people. So that's I created the hashtag. But now it's very active and there's lots of hashtags and there's lots of people. But when I first joined, it was limited, it was difficult. But it helped me stay in touch with the UK, what was happening in the UK, professional development. So it is really about following, depends what you're interested in, but following the right people, but a diverse range of people as well. So it's not just the same voices saying the same thing, but following a wide range of people. And also, though, having patience. Someone messaged me really recently and said, Kate, I basically want to do what you're doing. I want to write books and I want to have lots of followers. And I said, right, well, this has taken me 5 years. And I think I've got to this point because I also didn't have that attitude about I wanted followers. I was just sharing ideas that I thought were useful. And you have to be prepared with Twitter to take the rough with the smooth. And I'm experiencing this more and more as my follower count increases.
Yeah, we'll talk about that.
Yeah, that's tough as well. But anyone who shares something, you should sort of be prepared for that could be really helpful for somebody and you might get the likes and the retweets. But you are opening yourself up for professional criticism as well, which I do think is fair. If you're sharing something publicly, then it can go either way. And I think just that you have to be prepared for that.
Yeah, I think you wrote a really, really good article for us. I can't remember when. It was a few years ago, I think, about how to harness Twitter for professional development. And in there, you talked about having a real purpose and looking at people who are sending out tweets about research-backed strategies. And I think that's also key because there's a lot of hearsay and opinions on Twitter. So you have to be very strategic. What would you say to somebody who has zero knowledge of Twitter, how to start, where to start? What would you say should be their first step?
Well, my friend Tom Rogers actually did a course about this and it's on his YouTube channel about Twitter for teachers. But I suppose I've got a few bits of advice, really. The first bit of advice would be your username. Pick something, because I had 87 history for ages. I hated it. I've just changed it now. But I see people and they have all these, Kate 32789, and it's just keep it very simple, like Kate Jones Teach, incredibly simple, and also have something on there that is a little bit personal about you. It doesn't have to be too much, but a photograph of you or your location, because otherwise, if you close off too much, people won't connect with you. They'll think you're a bot or they'll just be very suspicious. But if they think, oh, that person, lives and teaches in Abu Dhabi, then I'll connect with them too. So you've got to just think about the profile that you're setting up, your username, and your bio. You can keep it very simple, but are you primary? Are you secondary? What is your subject? And then more people are likely to interact with you. Now, in my early days of Twitter, 2015, I was a Twitter lurker, like lots of people are, where I was just there to learn, and I would just be scrolling, taking ideas, and that's okay. And that's absolutely fine because people are sharing it to help others. And I always showed gratitude as well, appreciation. But then I got to the point where I felt, okay, I'll give it a go. I'll share some ideas. But there's absolutely nothing wrong with just getting Twitter, setting yourself up, taking a seat back and just watching the interactions, building a network of people who you follow. And then eventually just start sharing very honest, I did this today and it worked. And I read this article and I thought it was interesting. You might like it. And then that's how you just will eventually develop these networks, develop an audience. And it went from me sharing a picture of a worksheet or an activity to then speaking in Hong Kong about it, my book. So it really can sort of escalate. But as I said, just be patient with it. Some people get frustrated when they haven't got many followers and people don't respond and they feel like they're talking to a wall. But it just takes time, and it works both ways about sharing, but sharing the work of others too.
Yeah, but it can be a bit of a minefield. How do you deal with hate and harassment on Twitter?
Is something that sadly I do think it goes hand in hand with the more followers you get, the increase. There's been times where it's been very difficult for me and I perhaps haven't handled it as well as I could have. I've now got a mantra: block, report, forget. And I think the forgetting part is the hardest part because you can block and report quite easily. It's absolutely outrageous, some of the things that people will say on Twitter and do. And that is why those features are there, the mute and the block and the report, and you just shut it down as soon as possible. And there's some criticisms I've had that I thought, actually, that's a fair point. And then in a later book, I've then addressed it and said, actually, someone pointed this out to me and I reflected on it and I ended up doing things a little bit differently or better. So there's criticism and feedback that has massively helped me as a teacher. It's quite easy to become defensive on Twitter, which you need to just be a little bit open-minded. But I suppose that's because the people who did critique me did so in a way that didn't offend me, that was professional and helped me learn. People are often surprised. They might see me disagree with someone and then see me praising them a week later. And I'm not fickle. There are lots of people I respect and admire on Twitter, but I don't always agree with them. And that's okay. It's never really anything on major serious issues. It just might be an approach or an idea or a strategy. And yeah, it is a minefield. It is one of those things you've just got to take your time, figure it out. As I said, block, report, and if you can, forget, so you can just move on. Because the good far outweighs the bad. And I have to remind myself of that quite often.
Yeah, I mean, the fact is, this is somebody random on Twitter. They don't know you, so why should you take it personally? If there's no good in what they're saying, if it's not meant to build you, then why should you allow it to destroy you, is how I would look at it. And it is sad that it's there, but it's there.
Yeah, so very recently, I think this was yesterday, a man who follows me, who I've never had any interaction with, was moaning about the amount of tweets I put out and my self-promotion of my books. And I was ready to, write my reply. And I thought, actually, you're annoyed at seeing all my tweets and you're annoyed at my self-promotion. I can solve this problem for you. And I blocked him. And I thought, that's that. I don't need you in my life. And then I put out a tweet today, which I suppose it was in response to that individual, but it wasn't directly to him. And I just explained, here's the thing with self-promotion. If you write anything, an article for Teach Middle East magazine, if you write a blog, if you write a book, you want people to read it. It's not a diary that is private and personal. You're writing it for an audience, so you've got to share it. So there's that element, and you hope it'll be useful. And if I'm speaking at an event or a webinar, then I will promote that because I want people to attend. But I do think I balance self-promotion with the promotion and celebration of other people's work. And especially, people who have larger followings, I really do think they should, if they genuinely think something is good that somebody has shared, and they might not have a large following, then it is worth sharing that and retweeting it to give that a wider audience, because certainly that happened with me. There was a few people early on when I didn't have many followers who would pick up on things and share it, and then all of a sudden it put the spotlight on it a little bit more, and more teachers were finding it helpful. So I've got absolutely no problem myself with self-promoting, and I did quite a good job. I didn't report that person, but I blocked that person, and I'll just keep sharing my books and keep self-promoting my work and promoting others. And he had a problem with it, so he doesn't have to see my tweets anymore. So the problem is solved.
You helped him. I think you helped him to have a better day. You won't have to be miserable, because at the end of the day, the account is yours. Yeah. And you do with it what you want. And as long as you're being authentic, as long as you're not offending people, as long as you are trying, your motive is to be helpful. Because I think motive is everything. And if your motive is to be helpful, then be helpful, regardless of what some random person in random place thinks. Carry on with your motive. You know, we're going to miss you in the region.
No.
What are you going to miss about Abu Dhabi, about the UAE?
Well, BSAC, anyone who's familiar with the British School Al Kabira, I know you're very familiar with it. That is an incredibly difficult school to leave. I remember when I secured the job, I was over the moon. I was so happy. And actually, I envisioned myself staying here longer than 2 years. It's a school you could stay at forever. And the children are amazing. Mark Lepard, get him on your podcast if you haven't. My headmaster.
He is coming soon.
Tell him that I said good things about him. But he is the best. I wouldn't really describe him as my boss, but he is the boss. He's the best headmaster I've ever worked with. He's brilliant.
If he listens to this, though, I'll tell him, not bigging him up, because he supports Tottenham and he knows how I feel about that.
Yeah. Apart from that, I mean, and he's just taught me a lot about leadership just from watching him, and especially before COVID. And there was things that I hadn't really seen like previously. Like Mark is so present. I mean, it is harder now with COVID, but before COVID, every morning he'd welcome the students. He came into my lesson 3 times, just popping in and talking to students. And it was done in a way that was not threatening. Oh, the headmaster's here. So yeah, I'll miss the school so much. And I love Abu Dhabi in itself. I still feel like the novelty hasn't worn off. I prefer it to Al Ain, if I'm being very honest. Al Ain, I think, is great for families. I'm a single person and I wish I'd had longer here in Abu Dhabi. But the impact of COVID and not going home as regularly as I used to, I have really struggled with that. We all have, actually, haven't we? We've all thought we could go home in the summer and then we couldn't. We thought we could go home at Christmas and then we couldn't. I've been very honest with my students and said how much I'm struggling with it and it's taken a toll on me, and they have been so kind and understanding. And I felt that it was really important for me to do that, actually, because they see me as, you know, their teacher and this author, and they see me as this incredibly successful person. But I said, I have my struggles as well, because I'm human. We all do. So this year's changed a lot of things for me. But I'll definitely be back in the region. I want to come back for National Day because it's the big 50. So I feel like there'll be a big party. And I want to work with more schools in this region. I've worked with a few schools. I've got connections with lots of schools, with lots of teachers. It's a really exciting time in the UAE. Like I said, the network has developed far more than when I came out here. It's going in a really exciting direction with research, with Dubai College and British School Al Kabira really leading the way with that. And I like this evidence-informed approach. So it'll definitely be a place. I think in the past, when I came to the UAE, I was looking solely at the UK and educators there for inspiration and guidance. Whereas now I think I'll be in the UK, learning from people in the UK, and also looking to people in the UAE and schools in the UAE and seeing how they're doing it. And I'll be taking that back with me to the UK. This is what BSAC have done. This is incredible. You should try this.
Yeah. And I think what will happen as well is that you'll find opportunities to come back out here a lot more often than when you actually live here, because you'll be a little bit more free with your time and you'll be able to travel back and forth, you know, COVID permitting and everything, to maybe do events or to even run your own workshops, etc., on retrieval practice. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. But what are you looking forward to moving back to Wales?
Well, number one has to be my family. And actually, people keep saying, oh, they must be so happy to have you back. They keep telling me to stay here. They say, don't come back, only because, that sounds terrible. It's only because they see my Instagram and they see beautiful Abu Dhabi and they think, how could anyone leave Abu Dhabi? It's gorgeous. And I understand that. But then I say to my mum, but mum, you've got my sisters and my gran around you, and I'm here essentially living alone. And actually, the Lepards are like my family. They really are. They're my friends. I spent Christmas Day with Mark Lepard, actually, and his wife's my best friend. So I have got my own Abu Dhabi family, but I just need some time with my own family. Weirdly enough, there's so many things. I was chatting to people about what I'm looking forward to. It's really small things that after 5 years, I can't wait to see autumn for the first time. I'll probably have my first autumn and winter, and then I want to be back in the sunshine. But it's also going to schools in the UK. And I don't know when this will happen because of COVID, but lots and lots of events were happening in the UK. And I used to be really disappointed I couldn't make it. I'd look at the lineup and I'd think, oh, that's brilliant. I wish I was at that event. But I can't be there. So I'm looking forward to hopefully actually attending these events, being part of what's happening in the UK, learning lots and writing lots. So, yeah, it's very exciting.
We wish you all the best with all the things you have planned for the UK. I'm sure it will be great. It's good to be home. You might have a period of adjustment when your first winter will be a novelty, I think, and your first autumn and that type of thing. But then I think you will get busy and get settled and it will all work itself out. Life is a journey, and this part of the journey takes you back to the UK. So I'm sure you will enjoy it. It's been a real, real pleasure having you on the Teach Middle East podcast, Kate. I really appreciate you taking the time. I know we had some little misses of, when will we get this done?
Yeah.
But everything in its time. And I think this has been the perfect time. So thank you for joining me.
And thank you for having me as a guest, but everything that you've done in the region, all the opportunities you provided me to write, to speak at events, I'm really grateful for that.
You're welcome. I'm glad we could help.
Thank you for listening to the Teach Middle East podcast. Visit our website, teachmiddleeast.com, and follow us on social media. The links are in the show notes.